Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamley. Welcome to Season 8 of Another View. For the past 7 years, you have spent your Friday lunch hour with us, and Lisa, Victor, and I are so very grateful. Up next on Another View, analysis of America's position as the lone superpower in light of what some say is a new world order. So what is the new world order? What does all of this mean in terms of race, gender, the economy, jobs, our future? Legal, political, and historical analysis from award-winning analyst Dr. Claville. The Claville Report is next, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamley. Thank you, listeners, for your support of Another View. Today begins Season 8. 8 years of insightful, thought-provoking conversations about everything from politics to pop culture, and all from an African-American perspective. We so appreciate you as our listeners. Now, one of our award-winning programs is the Claville Report. Political and legal analyst Dr. Eric Claville is a regular on our show. He was the first to predict that Donald Trump would win the presidency. He has explained the conflict in the Middle East with accuracy and in terms that everyone can understand. And today he is with us to talk about a new world order and what that means for the United States and how it will ultimately impact the African American community. Eric, how you doing?
Wonderful, Barbara. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to see you again.
Same
Absolutely.
Here.
So before we get into the analysis of what a new world order is, I want you to talk a little bit to folks about how you come to your conclusions, because, you know, I don't want people to think, well, you're just spouting off your thoughts. You actually analyze a lot of information in order to come to the conclusions that you do.
Right. So, you know, my research and analysis is based upon history first. You know, history always repeats itself because as humans, we think that we can, you know, create a better mousetrap. But in actuality, we end up making the same mistakes, unfortunately. We do have some good points that we always improve upon, but ultimately, you know, we end up stumbling over those same stumbling blocks. In addition to that, I look at laws and policy. Laws and public policy, I believe, dictate three things. It dictates what people believe, it dictates resources, and it dictates what people do. You know, we've talked about that at length in previous shows. In addition to that, I look at economics. Economics, believe it or not, is a social science. A lot of times it's placed in academia in the math department,
right.
But it's actually a social science because it studies how people interact over supply and demand, goods and services, who controls what, when, where, and how, which is part of politics. And
determines power.
And it also determines power. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I take a temperature of what the average person is feeling. You always have to go below the surface to determine the true temperature of something. You just can't put your hand on your head and say, okay, I think something's wrong. You have to actually go inside the body. You have to really check and find out what's wrong. And it's the same with any country, any people. So a lot of times governments try to tell their citizens, oh, everything's fine, everything's okay, don't worry about it. But in actuality, you know, people are hurting and people are suffering. So, again, history, laws and public policy, economics, and really pay attention to the people on the ground and bring all that together. And then I come up with my analysis. Okay,
so a new world order sounds kind of new agey. We've heard about the world order before.
Right.
But in all seriousness, what exactly is a world order? And why do we care? What does that mean to us?
Right. So, you know, we have this beautiful planet that we've been given, planet Earth, and, you know, we've been given it to care for. We've been given it for our substance. We've been given it to us for us to create a better world while we're here and to pass on. With that being the case, man has created over time different ruling factions and different governments, different countries, different kingdoms. And different empires. Empires rise and empires fall. Kings rise to power, kings are overthrown, kings step down, and someone else replaces them. So basically, the world order in man's time has always been who dictates what on the world stage. If you look at the first great world empire, it was Egypt. Everything that we know, the basis of mathematics, basis of science, basis of medicine,
so it's cultural as well as military and all those other things. You literally set the stage basically for the world.
Exactly, from Egypt to Greece to the Roman Empire, and then the English Empire, which pretty much became the major empire of all the European nations out of Spain, France, and the Dutch, and so forth. But it was really the English. And then, of course, China being that its own empire, kind of insulated in the Asian part of Eurasia. And then, of course, the United States post-World War II. Post-World War II, after we got into the war and basically saved Western Europe from the Germans and Eastern Europe coming over, we basically have enjoyed the luxury of being the major dictator of economic power, of military power, and then also of soft cultural dominance and power as well.
Mm-hmm. So now people are saying, a lot of people want to blame it on Trump, but it goes back further than that we may be losing that position in the world.
True. So let's take a look at let's look at the military, then we'll look at economics. Mm-hmm. So let me start with the culture. Let me start with that first. Everybody in the world wants to be part of what America is. I mean, the values that we hold from the Declaration of Independence, from the Constitution, and from all the amendments that have helped to correct the problems of the original Constitution itself. Okay, keep in mind the original Constitution did not include amendments. So everyone wants to be a part of that, a land of freedom, a land of liberty, a land where you can come and achieve the quote-unquote American dream. Also, popular culture also helped to set the stage of what America is. Hollywood, television,
rap music,
hip hop, pop music, yes. and again, a lot of American culture is black culture, and I've said this before: black culture with a white face or acceptable tone or acceptable face. You can look at the way singers have changed the way they sing. People are now rolling their voices as African Americans roll their voices. You have white individuals that are rapping, which is something that was started as in black culture, and the list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, basketball is like an international sport now, which, of course, was revolutionized by, African Americans and so forth. But from that part, America dominates the culture of the world. People want to be what America is. Militarily, we have military bases and we have alliances with countries all around the world in order to, number one, keep what we call our enemies at bay. And these are any individuals who we feel will encroach upon our global power and our domestic power and our influence across nations. Mm-hmm. But primarily it's for economics. It's for supply and demand of natural resources, which is why a lot of our military is dispersed in Asia and also in what we call the Middle East or the Persian Gulf area. Mm-hmm. We also help with NATO. We pay a lot of money with NATO as well, because keep in mind, NATO helps to push back the former Soviet Union, which is now Russia after the wall fell under Reagan, but which was basically collapsed economically, helps to push them back and keep them at bay so they won't encroach up on those former Soviet nations in order to do damage to the Germans, also the Polish, and then of course the English and then the French. Because once you dominate those countries, you have a free flow across, quote unquote, the pond, the Atlantic Ocean, to the United States. Okay. So a lot of our reasons for being in various countries is to protect our interests as well. Of course, oil is a major reason why we're in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. There's absolutely nothing else there that is of really substance to us except for oil. 65% of the world's oil comes out of the Strait of Hormuz, okay, and around the Persian Gulf area. So we're there to protect that area because of our need. And of course, you have natural gas, which of course is dominated by Russia. Is also dominated by Nigeria, which is one of the largest exporters of liquid natural gas as well, one of the African nations. And then, of course, in South America, where you have a lot of oil, Venezuela, and also on the coast there. So economically, we have the military might in order to dictate the terms. And pretty much what the U.S. says, that's what everyone agrees to. Now, that has waned over the years. I believe it started waning, our economic might, after we signed a lot of these free trade agreements, because it opened up trade across the world without any tariffs and so forth, or penalizing other nations. What that has done, that's helped companies, corporations, to move jobs away from the United States into areas and markets where you can get cheaper labor. Okay, keep in mind, capitalism is a pyramid. Though you have a large base and we have a very, very small top. Okay, you only have one capstone, on a pyramid, but you have many pieces to that base that lead up to that capstone that support what we are as capitalism. But sooner or later, the base gets much larger and individuals tend to fall, the pyramid itself.
So is this why everybody's so upset then about the tariffs that President Trump has put into play, and now China's batting back at the United States with their own set of tariffs?
Well, in part, because what it's doing is making goods and services more expensive. So, we benefit as consumers by having products made cheaper because we can buy those things cheaper, as opposed to what we call at cost, what it really takes to make if we had those factories in the United States. But now they're going to go up because, of course, we have agreements with various countries to sell our products there at a discounted price with no tariffs.
And they do the same.
Exactly. Keep in mind, our largest trading partner is Canada. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that. And 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. northern border. So we have a lot of going back and forth of commerce with Canada, and only 10% of Americans live within in the northern part of the American border, because a lot of it really is wilderness area, really not a lot of things there. They primarily live in cities like Detroit and other metropolitan areas, Seattle and so forth. But those tariffs are a major issue of contention. And I believe that's also another bullet in the chamber, which will lead to
taking us down from being at the top of the food chain.
It is, and it's also leading to, we call it a trade war, but I believe it's a bullet in the chamber, the proverbial bullet in the chamber that will lead to the actual shots being fired to kick off this war, World War III, which I believe is going to be the war to end all wars, and I've been at the forefront of that since 2015, 2016, actually. So I believe the stage is set. And also, if you pay attention to the World Economic Forum, it's called by the popular name the Davos Conference, which was started by a professor, Professor Klaus, 1965, I believe, 67. But basically, he brought together world leaders from business, government, the private sector, and religious leaders to come together to help forge policy to suggest to nations on what he believes and we believe, meaning the controlling influencers of the world, to what they believe it should become. And in order to have a more sustainable world, because we were increasing in population, the Industrial Revolution was seeing strides in the standard of living of people across the world, more specifically European countries and also in America. And basically, this conference has grown to something every year to where it's something to pay attention to. I've been paying attention to it for about a decade now. And listening at the policy that's coming out of there. I remember the CEO and owner of Alibaba in China, which is the largest e-commerce company in Asia, said that he wanted to be the largest e-commerce, the largest retailer in the world. He's going to do e-commerce. At that time, I knew, hands down, he was going to make it happen because e-commerce was the future. He started looking at this algorithm-driven economy, which is an automation, which is taking over jobs by the droves, which is, I believe, the biggest threat to the economy in the short term and also the long term if our universities, if our K through 12 schools don't get it right in America and across the world. So you have countries who are rising up now to overtake what we call the hedge money or the loan superpower United States. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not going to topple overnight and be that country where another country is going to invade, like the movie Red Dawn back in the 1980s that I remember as a kid. Like, who are these people parachuting in? And why are they parachuting in Iowa? So they're not going to take over, that way. However, you're going to have major players in various regions of the world that are going to dictate policy where we're going to have to come to the table with them and negotiate in good faith. And they're not going to say, oh, because you're the United States, we're going to do X, Y, Z. They're going to say, because you are the United States, you're going to do what we ask you to do. That power in Asia is going to be China, who's now creating an economic force since we've backed out of the agreement in China. China has filled the void. And also, we get blocked in by all of the loud noise, that we hear in politics. And of course,
there's lots of loud noise.
It's lots of loud noise, lots of loud tweets, but it's the white noise that no one's paying attention to. And China has filled the void ever since the Bush administration, Bush 2, when we have taken our funds away from countries because we give like a little aid to countries here and there so we can get favors from them, where we can set up military bases, where we can come in and they say, oh, no, you're fine. Please feel free. The door is open. We've taken a lot of that funding away because we had to direct it toward these endless wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and soon in Syria, where we're actually going to be fighting on the ground there very soon, I believe. We've had to take away funding. China has filled the void, and they've come and filled it with cash to these countries.
So they're building alliances then that we used to have. In other words,
in the Lesser Antilles, very soon in the Greater Antilles, which is the Caribbean nation. Also, they're building alliances in Africa, on the continent of Africa. And it really is for what I call natural resource or land grabs. They're also building alliances in South America. So there are countries where they have actually come in and lease the land for X amount of time. And really what they've done is that they've gotten a land grab and they brought in now you would think this is a good thing, but they've brought in their workers in order to mine various precious ores. They've brought in to actually secure the natural resource in order to take it back to China because of their rising need for natural resources to build the Silk Road that they're building from the eastern shore in Beijing, Shanghai area, all the way to Europe, which is going to basically mirror the Siberian Railroad that was built over 100 years ago. Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun.
Absolutely.
So we've done it before when we built the railroad track in order to connect the east to the west.
Yeah.
So this has happened. But what's happening is that these countries, these African nations, are basically they're suffering as well because now you have that pyramid where the rulers receive all these favors, but the people don't get the jobs, and now they're also suffering.
So we're going to be talking about this new world order from a military perspective, from a political perspective, and so forth over time.
Yes.
But today we're going to focus on the economic impact that it's going to have on the United States based on your analysis. Correct?
Right. Correct.
And so where do you want to start with that?
Well, let's take a look at where we were after the Industrial Revolution. There's one text I want to give to the readers, and I'm going to give you some academic readings. This is by Professor Gordon. It's called The Rise and Fall of American Growth, and it's under the Princeton review, Princeton printing. And it's the U.S. standard of living since the Civil War. Basically, after the Industrial Revolution that we had in our country, there really hasn't been any major innovations in order to push the United States or the standard of living much higher. In other words, the invention of electricity, indoor plumbing, the inventions of the car, the railroad, and also flight, all of that had a huge change in the way that we operate, the way that we actually do business, and also the luxuries of the day, the refrigerator, the washer, the dryer, the stove, whether it be electric or gas. But since that time period, and let's look at it. Let's look at after 1960, okay? What has taken place, a major innovation that has really changed the course of how people
Technology.
live?
Digital.
Right, technology. But where did that actually create a higher standard of living? It did not. It actually decreased the standard of living of people in the country and also across the world.
Explain.
Well, basically, automation and technology has allowed for machines to do what people normally would do. And on top of that is push wages down as well. So basically what you would normally, I'll give you the example. If you would go to this gas station, I don't know if we can mention the name of it on air, but if you go to a gas station
Okay.
And you want to order a sandwich, there's one gas station where you just go up to the the screen, you press in what you want, you put in some special instructions, you wait back, and they call your name, you pick it up, and you can actually wave your tag or your phone across the reader, and you can walk right out. You didn't talk to one person while you were there. You didn't have to have anyone do anything for you in order to make that order or to complete that transaction. What you've done is taken away jobs from individuals that teenagers that normally get summer jobs. You've taken away from college kids that normally get jobs during their time in school. You're also taking that job away from senior citizens who normally would do those jobs in order to supplement their income.
But Eric, then what about the people who say, but since this is our new reality, all you have to do is study STEM. All you have to do is get into science, technology, engineering, and math, and mechatronics and things of that nature, because somebody has to fix those robots. So it's a change of job as opposed to losing jobs. You don't buy that argument.
I buy it to a certain degree, but it doesn't tell the whole story, because we're creating robots and it's called artificial intelligence that's becoming smarter. And when I say smarter, they're able to process daily operations and things that you do over and over again more efficiently. Now, of course, they can't think on their own. They can process things and go through these algorithms that are driving their decisions, such as these self-driving vehicles, which didn't work out too well initially, but they're going to go back and test it. So what you're doing is now you're creating more and more jobs to take away more and more jobs from people. There's a famous interaction between the last Ford, who was chairman of Ford Motor Company, and then at the time it was the head of the union, and they're walking through, and he's showing them these robots that are now working where factory workers used to work. Okay, and he turns to the gentleman who's over the union. He says, "I'd like to see you get these robots to pay your union dues." And he turns right back around and says, "I'd like to see you to get these robots to buy these cars." So
so there's that balance that we need to find.
It is a balance. So in the short term and also in the long term, it's not going to be good for a lot, because how many people can really work in STEM if that's the area where we're going. Now, don't get me wrong, STEM is going to be very important. We have a lot of jobs right now in STEM that we can't fill because the K through 12 and the higher education hasn't caught up to the job market, which is another discussion that we'll talk about later on another show. But for the most part, it's going to hurt the working poor. It's going to hurt the working middle class very hard. And then the very rich, they're going to basically be okay because of the investment that's going back and forth on these areas of innovation.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about where America stands in the New World Order and the impact it will have on everyday life with political and legal analyst Dr. Eric Claville. If you want to join our conversation, give us a call at 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Those are the numbers to call to join our conversation, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240, especially if you are a member of the middle class. Do you notice a change in your ability to make as much money as you have made in the past, that you anticipate making moving forward? We'd love to have you join this conversation, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. 888-260-2240. So, Eric, all right, we know that there's a ton of baby boomers
Yes.
who are retiring every day. Or want to retire every day, and a lot of them can't, because of the recession, because of a lot of different reasons in terms of economics. The millennials and the Gen Xers and so forth, are they the ones that will be able to take advantage of this STEM change or this reinventing of themselves in order to accommodate these new jobs?
Okay, so the millennials, meaning those who are currently in college or have graduated college, the answer to that, if they haven't prepared themselves already, the answer is no. If they're not in an area in academia that's going to land them a job the moment they get out, the answer is no. Individuals who are currently in K through 12, sixth grade, of course, elementary school, all the way up to 12th grade, still have a chance to take advantage if you do your research and you look at where not jobs are currently now in 4 years, well, now and then in 4 years, but really in the next 20 to 25 years. I want to go back to baby boomers, age 55 and 60. Mm-hmm. You know, what we're finding in employment law and public policy now is that, you know, it's unspoken rule. If between 55 and 60, companies are looking to get you out the door. Okay. Whether it's a move to a new product line that we want to develop that's not going to go well for the next 12 months, and they kind of know that, and they put you there. So when the product line fails,
it means the reason.
Right. You have a reason to put you out the door because the product line, not that you're 55 or 60 years old, but that's what ends up happening. And there's another book written by MIT economist. It's called The Vanishing Middle Class, Prejudice and Power in the Dual Economy. He gives an analysis of the plight of middle class earners and also prescriptions for the current state of affairs. I want you to go and your readers to go look at that and read that. But right now, you have individuals who are 55, 60 years old that can't really afford to retire because you really don't have enough in your 401k. A lot of individuals have taken money from their 401k in the first downturn of the economy when you had the housing bubble burst, or the IT. If you were part of Enron, you were wiped out completely. Then you had other companies. And then after that, some people took money out or got a second mortgage to send their kids to college. Mm-hmm. So that's what the March on Wall Street was all about. Was it
the 1%?
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street, because for the very first time, you had middle class, majority white individuals who were in these very good companies like GE, which, by the way, is really going to go by the wayside very soon. It's one of those companies that was the standard of the Dow and no more. So that gives you an idea of where we're headed. But these individuals now find themselves without the money and without the safety net. There are a few segments on PBS News I'll share with you where there's a highly educated 55 to 60-year-old African-American female who wrote a book called Faking Normal. And she talked about her struggles of being able, after the downturn in the economy, not being able to rebound.
Exactly.
And how she was on food stamps and almost homeless at one time. You're talking someone that had...
And I mean, she went from like a house like Georgetown type.
Yes.
Townhouse.
Yeah.
And the whole bit. And she owned her own businesses and everything. And she just could not come back.
But that's the story of not just her, but she found a group of individuals who were like that had these very good skills. But their job market did not match their skills. So unfortunately, Barbara, I believe that our baby boomers at 55 to 60 plus really have to make those hard decisions, to downsize, those hard decisions to let things go, and those hard decisions to right fit and right size their home, their living standard, because again, right now, I don't think they're going to be able to capture this new market that's going to help them to live the standard of living where they're used to living.
Also, when you brought up the point about 401ks and 403bs and all the other retirement products, they are tied to the stock market. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. And that's one of the things that I do see on the horizon. I do believe that the economy itself, not just with the baby boomers, not just with the vanishing middle class, not just with students who are strapped by student loans, and we'll talk about that in a second, which is, I believe, the next crisis on the horizon. But there are only 3 retirements that are not tied to the stock market. That's Social Security, which is a supplement, not meant to live on, but we know many people are. That's VA, Veterans Retirement. If you do your service in the military, you're guaranteed that pension for the rest of your life, and also medical care and so forth. And then finally, if you're a federal civil service worker, your pension is tied to the government in part. So outside of that, if you're a state civil service worker, if you work for a municipality, if you work for a private company, if you have your own 401k, it's all invested in the stock market. I believe that the stock market is overvalued. Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm not giving financial advice on the show, so please do not hold me to this. This is my analysis, this is my belief. But I believe that stock market is overvalued. I believe that we're headed for a major correction. And just think about it. At the Dow being at 25,000, if it corrects itself and goes back and cuts itself in half, all right, 12.5. Or even 15,000. What does that do for a person who's living on the income being produced by their 401k, even if it's investing in an income-driven mutual fund or whatever the case may be, whatever your financial advisor is?
That's going to cut the amount of money that they get.
In half. It's going to cut it in half. So they have to make those hard decisions as well. And if your home isn't paid for, if your vehicle isn't paid for, if you're really depending on that money to make ends meet, you're going to be up the creek. And we're going to see a round of new foreclosures start to take place. We're going to see a round of new layoffs start to take place. We're going to see a round of people dropping out of college. We're going to see a drop-off in higher education because of the layoffs. It's going to be a reverberating effect throughout the economy. Of course, it's going to hit very hard initially, and I don't think it's going to come back as strong as we think it did with what we've done, primarily because most of our increase in the stock market has been on really credit. Right now, we're about $22 trillion at a U.S. debt. Of that $22 trillion, now you have consumer debt attached to that, which is about $1.4 trillion as it relates to student loans. We're not talking about credit cards. We're talking about student loans, $1.4 trillion, about to be $1.5 trillion at the start of the fall semester for this academic year. And you have individuals that aren't finding jobs in those areas. So now they're paying $900 a month for student loans. It's impacting their living, their power to purchase. They're living as roommates in homes, or they
move back home.
They move back home with parents, and that affects the economy itself. So I believe we're at the precipice of this, and it's actually coming.
Look at the phone lines. They are lit up. So let's go to the phones. Mark joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Hey, good. Your guest mentioned white noise, and I can tell you white noise is a silent killer. And, every time I go into BJ's and shop, I ask, people I don't even know.
We're going into a big box store, okay?
Right. So go into a big box store, and I'm saying that the white noise, Dr. Claville, is that I'm looking at a bag of chips I used to buy maybe a year or so ago for $3.99, and it's $6.99.
Right.
I'm looking at cereal boxes shrinking, but the price is going up. And every time I go 2 times a week, and everyone I talk to is acknowledging that we're basically being priced out of the marketplace. And because we're worrying about the things that are evidently that looks like this crazy, what's crazy is what we're paying when we go shop for food. And until we get our minds wrapped around that in some type of massive cry out to change our habits to fight back to the corporate structure, we're going to basically have a dismantling of the middle class, because it's not sustainable, because there's no way that the wages are in any way contrast staying equal to the cost of our goods and services.
Absolutely. Mark, thanks so much for the call. I'm going to let Dr. Claville respond to you.
Mark, you're exactly right. And that's what Occupy Wall Street was about. We're seeing the price of food increase because of, it's more profitable in part to sell food overseas, so a lot of the market is going over there. And it's one of those things where, like you said, we have to wrap our minds around it. But the price of everything is going up. I remember we were going to the store and buy a can of green beans for maybe maybe 20 cents, and that was high. Now that same kind of green beans is, I think, almost 88 cents or $1. So you see the increase of price just over 20 years of that same product. The question is, what has changed? I believe there's going to be a leveling out, but I think we're still going to tick up higher before you end up.
Before it starts to level
right,
out.
before you go off the cliff.
Wow. Bill joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Bill. You're on the air.
I was doing great up until the phrase student loans was thrown out there. I'm 55, and I'm looking at the point that I've gone through in the last 30 years 3 economic downturns that I've managed to work my way back up.
Yeah.
Now that I find myself divorced and managed to hold on to my house to beat a couple foreclosures, refinancing. Now I'm 55, not making as much as I used to be, and myself, people I know in my generation, we're not economically where our parents were at the same stages of our life.
Right.
And a couple hundred years ago, there were laws passed that would break up wealth way up at the upper end of the scale, break that wealth up, break up that land up. And I'm not a fan of economic distribution, but something's going on here that wealth and power is being concentrated at the top, and we're down here fighting for scrap.
Bill, thanks so much for the call. Let's let Dr. Claville respond.
Bill, you mentioned student loans. I want to go back to that for a quick second, a few moments here. Okay. Student loan debt is reaching a crisis point. We're not talking about it because, for the most part, all universities are, unless you have these large $100 million, $1 billion endowments like our elite universities, are supported by the federal government giving loans to 18, 19, 22 years old in order to go to school. Mm-hmm. So, again, I'm seeing this clash getting ready to come. And most student loan, 2/3 of student loan debt right now are owed by women, because you have more women in college. And then of that, if you look at a subset group, African-American women hold the majority in their group of African-Americans of student loan debt from for-profit institutions. So now you have this large debt for these degrees that aren't pegged to the market, and that's impacting families, because now you have of every child that's born in an African-American family, over 60% of them are born, over 60% are born to a single mother, so 65% just about. So with that being the case, that impacts the opportunities for that child, that impacts where that mother lives, that impacts what schools that kid goes to, that impacts the choices that child has for the future, and becomes even more bleak. So
there's a trickle-down effect from starting with you got to pay back the student loan, and then you have to factor that into the fact that you didn't get a good job, that paid a lot of money. You still have these exorbitant bills that you have to pay. It impacts how you live for the rest of your life.
Exactly, because things are getting cheap. You also mentioned wealth being consolidated at the top. Keep in mind, Wall Street got their bailout several times, not just one. The last bailout and the biggest heist was this last tax bill that passed. It was the biggest heist in American history, modern American history. With that,
what do you mean by that, Eric?
Well, what I mean by that is you have the capital gains tax, which is pushed down to 20%. You have the top earners tax that was pushed down. Most individuals who are considered in the top 1%, they get their money not from income but from investments. So now you're paying less money on those investments. The government has less money to bring a tax base into. So now if you have a middle class that's vanishing, if you have millennials that are working jobs without benefits, 30 hours a week, and working 2, sometimes 3 jobs in order to make ends meet, still living home with mom and dad, where is this money coming from to pay for these social programs that's supposed to help bridge the gap, and where automation and artificial intelligence is now taking over, and where the free trade agreements didn't decimate those blue-collar worker jobs. So now you have basically individuals scrambling to cut programs, which is what we're seeing when the House passed the bill to cut food stamps. Well, I call it food stamp, but it's the SNAP program, supplemental food program. And, that's a head scratcher. Of course, the Senate, they worked on their bill, which basically restored. But the fact that it got out of the House should be alarming to everyone in the country.
So Ray joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Ray. You're on the air.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I heard the same doomsday scenarios back in the 50s and 60s when factories were being automated, for example, in canning and sodas and stuff like that, which used to be done by hand. Now they were being done, automatically without human intervention, but it actually created more jobs. And my second point is that colleges today are probably pushing our students through in programs that when they get out of college, they have no chance to get a job. They're stuck in menial jobs with a degree. I think our colleges and our other educational institutions have to get on board to create our students with jobs that we need in society. Basically, Those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Ray. We appreciate the phone call.
Ray, thank you for your comment. I hear that. I hear that point all the time where they say, we've heard this before and things have gotten better. In actuality, things have not gotten better. If you really look under the surface, again, go to Professor Gordon's writing, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, the U.S. Standard of Living Since the Civil War. It has not. And for some, it has. Don't get me wrong. However, that pot has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's at its smallest that we've seen.
I remember in our conversation, we were saying that if you're poor, you probably will stay poor or get poorer.
That is correct.
If you are rich, you will stay rich or get richer,
Yes.
and the middle class is the one that's really going to be slapped and squeezed out.
You're exactly right. Barbara, at this point, if you're not really taking assessment of your living standard and saying, okay, we have to prepare ourselves, whatever case may be, which every family should do, but we know that doesn't happen, you're going to get hit, with that blindsided right hook. And it may be one to knock you out to where it's going to be hard to recover. So I just encourage all listeners and just all families just to take stock of your personal standing and see where you are.
Okay, Heather joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Heather, you're on the air.
Yes, I stand behind every single point that Dr. Eric Claville has made. I have notes. I have read these books. I've gone to Princeton for seminary. I will find that other book. My biggest point is, because I would like us to move from despair where we are, where many people are one illness away from losing the roof over their heads because the medical CEOs have taken it away from good, well-meaning doctors and insurance companies, as well as everything else that you've pointed out. But must we shift from capitalism to another form to create a more affordable living wage where we can budget better our own households, our own energies, moving off of fossil fuels, because it is a small planet, obviously our wars take a lot away from our budget as well.
Okay. Heather, you know what? I hate to cut you off, but I want to give Dr. Claville a chance to answer because we're almost out of time. So I appreciate your call. What can we shift away from capitalism, and what should we do about this?
Sure. There's actually this push now for what's called a basic living income, because individuals, and it's basically a mix of capitalism and what we call European socialism. In Europe, there's a very high tax. However, a lot of services that we pay for, they enjoy free of charge. And I say free of charge is because of the high level of taxes. Even their work week, I remember when their work week increased to 40 hours, they were marching in the street. They were only working 4 days a week, 32 hours a week, and really enjoying the quality of life. I think we can. I think because of greed, that's going to be kind of hard. But we can it has to come from a grassroots push. However, I believe because of artificial intelligence, what has been in place, we're going to have a major downturn, but we can help ourselves in stages as opposed to going off the cliff. But I tell everyone, and if we go into solutions now, right now,
3 minutes.
I have small sons, and we talk all the time, and my wife and I, and we're planning, for them to say, hey, what is that you like to do? We're looking at what's in the future and helping them to plan to take advantage of it. Even now, while, saving and things of that nature so that they can be ready and they go out into the world and not blindsided. And we talk, we look at our standing, we look at our status, we talk all the time and we look at various things. And that's what I think every family, every person should do. Ask yourself, what are your goals? What are you doing to meet them? Where have you made those missteps? Where you can find processes to help correct them. But moving forward, I think, again, we are headed toward that clash. Debt doesn't lie. We've got $22 trillion in debt. That bill's got to come to be paid. If we don't get any federal legislation to help students with student loan debt, it's going to be a major punch in the face for the buying power of the current millennials. And if universities don't right size and fit their programs for students, they're going to lose students, which is their lifeblood of their economy. And we're going to see a major downturn. So what ends up happening is that if we don't have the money for it, houses don't get built, homes don't get refinanced. If we see a major downturn, the buying power where you would go buy something, individuals not going to be there for those jobs. So again, it's really going to depend upon the individual, but also helping to push public officials to create public policy to help the little man, because the rich, they're out. They got their bag of cash. Steve Mnuchin and those guys, he pushed it through. Mm-hmm. Goldman Sachs, they're out of here, okay? Their investments are overseas.
So we've got to work within our country, within our local jurisdiction, starting with that.
We do.
In terms of making sure that we have the right laws and the right way so that we can survive and to take care of ourselves, to look at our individual responsibility in all of this.
Yeah, and all politics is local. So what can the local officials, the local Chamber of Commerce do? I want to give you one more book. It's called The Virtual Competition, The Promise and Perils of an Algorithm-Driven Economy by Stuckey. From the Harvard Press. Again, look at The Vanishing Middle Class, Prejudice and Power in the Dual Economy, MIT Press. And finally, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, the U.S. Standard of Living Since Civil War, on the Princeton Economic Series Press.
Okay, and what we will do is put this on our website, anotherviewradio.org.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Eric. As always, we will have you back for another Claville Report where we'll take on the military and the political sides of this issue also, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Claude McKnight of the group Take 6, and you're listening to Another View.
There's a new sun rising. I can see a new horizon. You will keep me realizing you're the biggest part of
Wow. Boy, that music sounded good today, I tell you. Each year, millions of Americans find themselves battling a mental health condition. Some never seek treatment because of the stigma tied to it and are often shamed into silence. In minority communities, the problem is intensified by cultural perceptions and a lack of access to quality medical care. July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and each week, Another View will bring you personal stories along with information and resources to educate and enlighten all of our listeners about this important health issue and how you can help turn things around if someone you know is suffering in silence.
I just remember never really being happy.
Whitney Graham battled depression for 25 years, noticing the first signs when she was just 7 years old.
Always unhappy, lonely, wanting to sleep, always wanting to wear dark colors. My sleep pattern always being off, concentration level always being off.
It wasn't until she was married with children of her own that Whitney decided something had to be done.
I knew that I didn't want them to have to go through the same thing that I went through. I felt that it was my responsibility to get the help that I needed and educate myself so that I can know what to look for in my children if there was ever a time when something was bothering them.
Whitney is one of close to 20 million Americans living with some type of depressive illness. And while it can impact people from all walks of life, African Americans are 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems than the general population. And depression is one of the more common disorders found in the Black community. To make matters worse, cultural habits and historical experiences can cause mental health conditions to be stigmatized to the point that the person needing help never seeks it.
It's a stigma. It's a stigma. It's something that's swept under the rug. It is something that our mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers will say, there's nothing wrong with you. You'll be fine. You're just going through a moment. We don't want to be labeled. And it's just a topic that we do not like to discuss.
We asked Dr. Ernestine Duncan, a clinical psychologist and chair of the Department of Psychology at Norfolk State University, about the stigma associated with mental illness.
When we talk about mental illness, people usually associate there being something really wrong with individuals. And so as a result of that, people are afraid to admit when they have emotional problems, when they have psychological issues. People are somewhat judgmental when people show psychological illness. We think that there may not be cures for what people are struggling with. And so people tend to hide the fact that they have issues related to their mental health. And when that happens, just like any other illness or disorder, untreated, it typically will become worse.
In addition to depression, Dr. Duncan shared other mental health disorders that are more prevalent in the African American community.
We tend to see more attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We tend to see it more commonly in younger people, those who are school age. Although there are diagnoses in adulthood for ADHD, there is a disorder, schizophrenia, and it most usually is diagnosed in the early 20s. It is considered late adolescence, and schizophrenia is a disorder that involves distortions of thinking. And so people will be more likely to report hallucinations or delusions. And we tend to see that being diagnosed right around age 20 to 23.
When it comes to treatment, research strongly supports the use of medication, psychotherapy, and participation in a support group where members share experiences, learn coping skills, and exchange information on area services. But the first step is getting help. If the person suffering is someone you care about, have the conversation.
As a child, not really knowing what it was very confusing for me. It's like everyone else would be happy and stay happy, but I would only be happy for a moment. I dealt with that my entire childhood and not knowing how to share it with my parents that I was feeling different. And it wasn't until I became an adult that my mom shared with me that she knew something was different, but she didn't know what it was. And so I shared with her that you loved me, you nurtured me, you did everything that you could, but you never asked me how I felt mentally. And when I said that to her, she broke down.
We should have the conversation. We should seek help when it's indicated. If your child comes to you and tells you that they have a headache, and that headache has persisted for a week, I'm willing to bet we're going to make an appointment with the doctor. We may even go to the emergency room. But do we know what's going on with our children emotionally, psychologically?
Dr. Duncan goes on to say, once you have the conversation, be it with an adult or child, be prepared to respond with solutions.
You can talk to me. We can go talk to someone else, however you would feel most comfortable. And so I really want you to know that I'm here for you. And if you would like for me to go with you to your doctor's appointment, if you would like for me to go with you to talk to your pastor, because pastors are often people that we feel more comfortable talking to. But to give people choices and to let them know that we support the choice that they make.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And our mental wellness series is in partnership with the Ardix Foundation. For more information, please visit ardixfoundation.org. That's spelled ARDX foundation.org. And if someone that you know is contemplating suicide, please call the suicide hotline at 1-800-273-8255. 855. That's our show for today. Afraid you missed something and want to hear it again? Download the Another View podcast at anotherviewradio.org. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, so like us and find me on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week, it's the return of our all-female roundtable. Alvian Lyons, Dawn Hester, and Allison Moore share wit and wisdom on current events. That should be a great conversation. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer. And Jordan Yowell answered our phones. Thank you, Jordan. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.